Hello and welcome back to the Better Places podcast, where we explore the politics, planning and people shaping London's built environment. I'm Siddo, Dwyer, joined today by my guest host, Rochelle Blakeman. Welcome, Rochelle. This episode is all about the rise of co-living, what it is, who it's for, and whether it can help tackle two of London's big challenges, the housing crisis and urban loneliness. We're joined by two brilliant guests to help us explore it all. Mark Thomson is planning director at Savills, with over 2 decades of experience delivering major housing and regeneration schemes across London. Welcome, Mark.
Hi, Siddo.
And we've also got today Rosie Ashton, who's the design manager at Verv-life, an architect with more than 20 years experience shaping co-living and purpose-built rental housing designed to foster connection and well-being. Welcome.
Thank you. It's not quite 20 years, it's 15, I'd say,
15.
but and 10 years on specifically on build to rent and co-living, but yeah, not that old yet.
Welcome, Rosie, and thank you
you
so much for the correction. And from design and management to community and policy, we'll be asking, can co-living really redefine how Londoners rent, live and connect? So let's get into it. And thank you guys so much for taking the time to come and join us. And this is something that is often kind of constant debate in the office, whether it's Rochelle and I or across the business. We're constantly trying to rack our brains around if it's not traditional housing, then it's an alternative type such as this one. I guess just to open, and for you guys to give us a bit more sense about who you are and some of your work, without me adding 5 more years onto your onto your life. Open question: what is co-living,
Well,
and what is it not?
yeah, good second part. So I've been advising and working with in the sort of co-living space for probably over a decade, and that's really from its emergence. And I think what co-living is an important rental product that's part of, I think, the kind of evolving housing market that we have. I think people's housing needs are different to what they have been in the past, and it really is, defined, I guess, as purpose-built shared living. So it's a sort of combination of having a sort of private room that's got your ensuite, but then you've got access to a range of amenities, and those are supposed to come together to sort of foster a building that's got a community living in it with a range of amenities. I hopefully covered that, Rosie.
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably move on to the what is it not, and it's not an HMO. It's not shoving people into spaces that they don't want to live in. It's very much, as you say, there's a market out there for people that want their own private space, but also want to be able to meet people. They want the convenience of moving in and out whenever they want to, rather than trying to find a group of people to share a house with and making sure you get on with everyone. It's very much you as an individual moving into that space and then meeting people when you're in there. And that's why our activities that we do at Verv-life, our events, are really important, because that's what makes the community. It's those spaces and how you use them.
And on the what is it not, of course, we're probably familiar with HMO and maybe very active residents, but housing multiple occupancy, how do we kind of separate the two? Or if co-living is kind of purpose-built and an HMO isn't, maybe a refurbished building, how do you really distinguish the two?
I think you distinguish it, I think, by the level of engagement and what happens in that building. I think, I always think of co-living buildings, and I've been fortunate enough to have taken them through planning and now to see them occupied, and, Verv-life's, operate a lot of them. These buildings are living and breathing. They've got events going on. They've got people who are engaging. There's a well-being, a welfare. It's not just a transient community who come and go. It's people who build friendships. They might go on to build to rent or go on to home ownership. I think HMOs are really, they're very fixed. They can be potentially quite isolating because, in my past, I lived in a HMO above a Chinese takeaway, and there was a bit of mold on the wall, and that at that point in time, probably over a decade or so ago, that was my housing choice.
Yeah.
That's what
it is for a lot of people.
That's what I did. I think it's really that community and I think the sort of welfare and lifestyle that I think is different.
Yeah, and the professional management. I mean, most HMOs are not professionally managed, and therefore that's why they can often sort of be seen as maybe not the best spaces to live in. Whereas within a co-living development, you've got management on site, so everything is to order. Well, to order is not the right word, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's all, you know. And if you have got issues, your landlord is pretty much there to fix it for you, and it's not usually the case in an HMO. So that's often why you can, but the bad reputation is probably what they have really because of that instance.
It's usually something that's seen as both actually HMOs or even co-living, but we'll stick to co-living, focused around kind of young professionals or people who have just even moved to, let's say, London, where we are, and want to build a network around them. They may not necessarily want the full commitment of a flat on their own. How has it evolved in the time that you both have worked on co-live products?
Well, I can tell you a couple of facts on that sort of connectivity that you were just sort of talking about there. So I know, so when we surveyed our co-living residents, I think we surveyed 1,600 at the time, and about 20% said that they moved into a co-living development because they wanted to make new connections. Like you say, they'd moved to somewhere like London and they wanted to meet new people. But by the sort of end of it, about 80% had said that they had made new connections. So it's quite interesting that actually, you know, people are moving in there because they want to meet new people, but they actually are meeting new people. More people are actually benefiting from meeting other people than they initially thought.
In terms of that well-being point and connections, one of the biggest selling points of co-living that you hear sort of in the media is that tackling urban loneliness. So in your view, does co-living tackle urban loneliness, and what are the benefits there?
I think it plays a part in tackling it. I don't think there is one solution, but yeah, definitely with, like I said, with the events and meeting people. And the one thing I'm always quite conscious of is intimidating spaces, and I always try and make sure the amenity in the spaces are not intimidating for people who are on their own. And one thing I talked about the other week was just imagine if we did sort of like an example of like a pub quiz. Now, normally you would go with a group of friends and you'd make a team. But if you're on your own, you're going to be quite intimidated. So there are things you can do, like give people colours and then they're in that team. So you're actually kind of encouraging people to get into a team even if they're on their own, and that can kind of help with that loneliness because you don't feel too intimidated to turn up to something like a pub quiz, a team quiz on your own, because you know you will be given a team exactly like everyone else will. There won't be that sort of sense of the popular kids are in one team and the rest of us are in another. So just sort of managing that intimidation, I think, is a really important part to sort of avoid the loneliness. Otherwise, yes, you could probably kind of go back into your shell, which is what we don't want to encourage in a co-living development.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, I think, in my experience, and it's sort of part of the evolution of co-living, is you know, we are now into sort of, you know, a third generation, you know, maybe even getting into a fourth generation of co-living in terms of delivered products, delivered schemes in London, and obviously now into the regions as well. And I think what you're offering in the building, how it's designed, I think is addressing urban loneliness. As Rosie said, it's probably not the only solution, but I think it offers one where, without co-living, I think someone's housing choice is going to be limited, and that, you know, just having the choice itself of going into something where, you know, if you get home at, you know, 2 a.m. because you're a nurse who's done a night shift, you're coming into a space that's got security. You're coming into a space that other people might be similar to you. And I think just having that, I think, automatically helps. And designing spaces now, you know, we can sort of see things that work really well in practice, and spaces like lounges or amenity spaces that might be too big because people don't feel comfortable sitting in such a big space. So as Rosie said, actually designing them so people want to balance their time between being in their private room, but then also they can go into those amenity spaces and meet people.
Yeah. And so how do you go about designing sort of a communal space? And like, do you have any good examples of like good practice in design and bad practice? Like what would the ideal, let's say, community oriented co-living space look like?
And just to build on that before you jump in, I think it's really quite interesting that this is the one kind of housing product that I've seen that really focuses on beyond just kind of green space and open green space, but inside the building. That the inside really matters beyond just the kind of four walls that will come by. So yeah, to Rochelle's point, where's the starting base?
Well, I like to try and concentrate the amenity within one area, and that's not just because it's more efficient. I find it works better for the residents as well, because you know you're going into that social space, and if your social space is divided, you might decide one day, I'm going to go to the lounge, so I go all the way up here to the lounge and then turn left. Oh, there's no one in the lounge, so I've got to go all the way back down and try the other sort of co-working space that's on the other side of the building. Whereas if you have it all together, you can kind of just come to that general space. You can see who's in the lounge, you can see who's in the co-working space, you can see who's in the dining room, and you can kind of decide from there which way to go. And that's why it kind of works better when it's together, because it all kind of works and reads together as a space. And yeah, you're not sort of going all the way around the building trying to find people. You know everyone's in that area. So that's how I think a well-designed space works in terms of co-living, but obviously, yeah, really safe, as you say. I mean, I made a note about nurses and people who work in airports who have all these really odd hours, and actually if you locate this is actually about the location of the whole development. If it is near a hospital or an airport, you're going to have people living in that in the co-living development who work in the hospital or the airport doing strange hours, and they won't feel alone because they'll know that I might come in, like you say, at 2:00 in the morning, but so does so and so that lives on the 4th floor. So that's another really important point. And then I just feel gyms are really important. That always comes up really high.
Oh, absolutely.
So again, that's that well-being, and a lot of people use the gym as a social space as well. And if you then create classes or who can do the most miles in the week, and sort of that kind of bringing people together through the gym as well is really important. And then so I was just sort of talking about safety, because I was thinking about the concierge, and how, and that space as well is really important, that you want to come in, you want to feel welcome when you come in. It's really nice to have someone there to say hello. I quite like it when the post and the parcel is something where everyone has to walk past, because then it gives you a reason to stop and talk to other people that are also getting their post or getting their parcels. And again, it's a really good space to advertise events that are happening within that area as well. So you're sort of encouraging people to walk past an area, which then advertises what's happening, and then that then increases people coming to those events and getting to know each other.
I think, Mark, perhaps a planning question. In designing or in working with architects and designers to create a large open amenity space in buildings where, especially in London, where space is so constrained and heights are always a big challenge. How much of a challenge is it to secure investment for schemes like that?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, because I think we've gone on a journey in planning where we've started out with no policy framework, going back to sort of prior to 2021. We then had a policy come in, the current London plan. We've subsequently had some GLA guidance, and what that amenity space is as a quantum has sort of changed. We now have a sort of per resident effectively threshold, which gives us some sort of, gives schemes the ability to sort of benchmark. But it really does come down to actually what's happening inside those spaces. And as you said earlier, unlike any other sort of type of housing or scheme that's taken through planning, the detail of what's in those spaces is really important. And it really matters to the sort of planning process that we go through, but then on to delivery and operation. So it's getting the right, and come back to one of the questions earlier about what the what makes good design of sort of these amenity spaces. I think it's also what's happening outside the building, its location. If you're on a high street and you've got lots of restaurants and lots of cafes, you want to be thinking about how you're offering, and if there's public access, how does that relate? I was involved in a scheme which is now operational where they've got a church who uses some of the amenity space on a Sunday morning, and that is integrating a community within a building, a co-living building, into its neighbourhood, but also that's activating that space. It's it's getting people involved, so people in the building, and they also do art showings and partnerships with local charities, and I think that's just as important as sort of thinking about the community within the building, as if you can get the good design to also be outward into whether it's somewhere that's in a regeneration area or somewhere that's already very established. We've had developments where we've looked at do we put in a big gym, or do we just have a really flexible place for classes, because actually there's a number of very established gyms already in the area that people might be able to go to instead, and so it's kind of supporting the local high streets as well. So I think good design of the amenity space has got to be what happens in the building and then what happens outside as well.
Yeah, and just to add to that, because I think there is a misconception that co-living is just kind of transient in the community, and it's just bringing sort of outsiders in who aren't originally from that community. So yeah, that sounds really important as well in helping to tackle that myth almost and integrate them into the community.
Yeah, and you tend to find rents in London and other key cities have gone up significantly over the last few years, and that's some structural changes in terms of rental supply, private landlords, and actually that you can look at the lease up rates of most of the co-living schemes in London, and they are one scheme had a waiting list. There's a real demand for this, and a lot of it is people living in those areas, because they're without this, their choice is to potentially move further from their place of work, potentially move out of London if they're in London. And I think these aren't just for attracting people into the area. As you say, a lot of the people who are in these schemes, some of the research data has shown that people enjoy staying in them for longer than what was originally thought might just be a transient population. I think there's some schemes where operators have told me that they've had people in there since the doors opened, and they're sort of 2 or 3 years, because they love living there. They love the community, they love the amenities, they love the location, and actually these are people's homes. I think sometimes in a lot of the discussions that I'm involved in planning, it's sort of felt or treated that these aren't homes, these are just temporary. But they're not, they're people's homes, and people love living as part of this type of community.
And I've got 2 questions, slightly separate, but I think the first is, I find it quite interesting that you both touched on the area itself and how that informs the internal immunity. Again, try and walk some of our listeners through that process. Once you find a site and you know that this is what you're seeking planning permission for, how much research do you do about what's in and around the area? Because I think one of the main appeals for me when I've looked at co-lives, and I've seen some in South Mims, which, if anyone knows, is just outside the M25, near where I am. But I've also looked in London as well. And one of the draws for me is if I am going to pick up or find a flat or co-live space, I would like a gym, probably like a cinema room, somewhere where I could work. If there are too many, co-working spaces in the area, would you limit that amount of space internally? Or if there are too many gyms, as you've mentioned? So what it's a chicken and egg type scenario, but what informs you? Is it the customer, or is it what's outside the building and what they have on offer? Probably a question to you both. But I'll start with you, Rosie.
To be honest with you, it depends on the scale of the development. So whether it can be self-sufficient and actually provide a really decent gym for its members that will be fully occupied and decent. And again, with the co-working, if the scale sort of allows you to provide a really decent space, then it is in some ways I think better to have that on site and have that exclusivity and for the residents to feel like it's exclusively for them and be properly managed. If it is a smaller scale development, that's when I might start to look at a little bit more about where we can use things on within the rest of the wider area. Especially if it's something like a gym. So we do always try and put, like exactly like you said, that sort of fitness suite where you can have something on site which you can do dance classes, yoga, etc. And then if it's at a smaller scale, and then look at maybe links with gym memberships. In terms of co-working, we wouldn't normally. I haven't worked on one where we've suggested that the residents go use a separate co-working space. I think having something on site is really useful for that work from home. I think we at least sort of. I can't remember the exact figures, but I think definitely at least 60% of our residents work from home at some point, and I think it's about 30% that work 3 to 4 days from home. Mm-hmm. So it is something that's really important to have on site.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting question, because I think they're the sort of core amenities that go into co-living, and I think in that process of sort of we've got a site and we're working as part of the design team and operational team, and we're thinking, right, okay, how does that fit together, and how does that work, and what's happening in the local area. It can really vary in terms of I'd say what's around it, what the scale of it is. If you're talking about something which is 300-400 units, that's going to have its own needs. Where something perhaps on a slightly smaller scale, you might need to be a bit more specific. But certainly, I think, with these buildings being managed and, they've got a life of their own, there's a lot of flexibility in that. And I think that's what I think sometimes the planning system struggles with, flexibility, and actually being able to bring something forward to go, well, actually, if that doesn't happen, well, the space will be utilised for this use. And a lot of co-living schemes that certainly have been operational for a couple of years now, I know are going through that process where people go, well, actually, this is important floor space. This is part of what we're offering to residents, but it doesn't work. So should it be a podcast studio? Should it be a Peloton room? And that's just trying to keep up with the changing needs of what renters and what people want.
Yeah, exactly. So, if it's a smaller scale, it could be a co-work space in the day, but the residents lounge in the evening. So you can kind of provide those two things, but within one area. Yeah. No, we are seeing, a lot of people kind of... so actually, we don't recommend cinema rooms themselves anymore. We call them multimedia rooms, because what we have noticed is our residents are using existing cinema rooms, but for music or for gaming. So actually being able to use that space for different things rather than just strictly cinema rooms. So yeah, definitely agree with you there, Mark.
Yeah. One thing that's been at the tip of my tongue is affordability. Not least because we're talking so much about amenity and what's accessible on site, but also in and around it. How affordable are some of these products, and how in reach are they for a lot of people who are either moving into the area or perhaps or wanting to find a community but near where they live?
Good question. What we typically tend to find is, and obviously it's very location specific, but you're typically finding that there is an affordability against your typical sort of private rented sector build to rent product, where obviously, typically in the private rented sector, you'd be paying for your rent, council tax, gas, electricity, Wi-Fi, water, all that goes on top. But with co-living, you typically get an all-inclusive rent, and opposed to a sort of typical tenancy of 12 months, you'd be signing one which is a minimum of 3 months. So it's got the flexibility, which is, I know that doesn't answer your question about affordability, but I think flexibility is important in terms of the housing market and what I think Londoners need. And then, so you are typically talking about a kind of 10%-ish discount against those. Once again, there are going to be sites and schemes where that discount is going to be greater. There's some that might be a little bit below that, but typically, this is a product which has got an affordability element to it. I think there's definitely an opportunity in London to be looking at an ability for discounts market rents as more of an affordable product. specifically for things like key workers. And I know the mayor's obviously, consulted on and has got a key worker tenure. And I just, those intermediate rents, I know we all appreciate that affordable housing is important in London. And I think co-living can be part of that conversation and should be part of that conversation, because key workers are the heart of London and keeping London going. And I think having a discounted market rent within a product like this, which offers the well-being and security, I think the combination of that, to me, there's a logical answer here, which is that DMR, discounted market rents for co-living, is something which could, I think, be really important for London's future.
Thank you for that, Mark. And I wonder, Rosie, how exactly have the studios changed over time to meet some of those challenges?
So the studios have changed quite a bit, because a lot to do with fire regulations, actually. So originally we have our kitchen unit. As you kind of walk in, you might have your ensuite on the left and your kitchen unit on the right, and then you kind of have your bedroom living area. But now, because of the new regulations, the kitchen unit and the hob basically is now further back towards the window.
Which I have noticed, because
Yes.
I have been looking lately, and I did think to myself, that seems different.
Yes. And originally, I think when we first had to do it, it was a bit of a challenge, because it kind of flipped everything kind of the other way round, and we were like, hang on a minute, we need to have the kitchen over there, and then so where does the bed go and where does the wardrobe go? But actually it's kind of led to this kind of new layout which has the sort of bathroom area and the entrance, and then you might have a study area there as well. And then you kind of have your sleeping area, and then again with the kitchen at the back, that's kind of led to this almost kind of living zone. So you might have your kitchen and your lounge there. So it's almost kind of developed into 3 separate zones rather than one space, which it sort of was before. So that's how it's kind of developed a bit more, and that's kind of come from the building regs. But because we've got that, we're also leaning to slightly larger studios as well. So I think some of the sort of second generation ones are kind of around 15, 16 square metres. And obviously the new regulations are saying 18 square metres at least, but actually we're seeing at least 21 square metres for it to have that really nice living space within that studio. So it is becoming a little bit more sophisticated. It is nudging slightly larger, just because, yeah, like you say, these are people's homes. They're not just rooms. They are people's homes. And I feel like 21 square metres is kind of just what you need to get your home within that space.
Yeah. And in terms of affordability with that, because often we think of co-living as being like a single person occupant, but I know like a lot of, when you live in London, a lot of my friends, you'll sort of talk about sharing, like not only just to be with friends, but because it makes the rent cheaper. So do you think there's the potential to incorporate that into co-living? Do you think it's suitable, for example, for couples to share the rent cost, or for, say, like a group of friends to rent a few rooms that are close to each other, just with that to lower costs? Or is that not really something that co-living would accommodate?
Well, on the couples side, I think we have about 5 or 6% dual occupancy in our co-living developments at Verv-life at the moment, and they're likely to be the larger ones, which are sort of lean more towards kind of 28 square metres. In terms of being able to live with your friends, I think it's individual tenancies, so I don't think that would affect affordability for groups of people. But yeah, for couples, at the moment we're seeing about 5 or 6% dual occupancy.
I think as part of the evolution of co-living, I think I walked around a scheme outside of London recently, which has got some cluster units. So where you've got 4 co-living rooms, each of those has a private ensuite, but it's got a sort of kitchenette which is just shared between those. Obviously, those residents still have the benefit of lounges and all the other amenity spaces. It was only a portion of the scheme, so it wasn't all clusters within the entire co-living development. I know that's happening outside of London, and there's quite a few planning permissions or schemes where that exists. And that obviously appeals to your sharers or friends. Whether that will come into London, I think there's there's a sort of clarity of what the product is, and I wonder whether that might stray us a bit more into kind of the build to rent space.
Well, I was about to say that sounds like an HMO to me, because there are HMO guidelines, and it's rooms, en suites, no kitchens or anything within those rooms, and then a shared kind of kitchen diner. So I think for co-living, we would certainly want to sort of stay away from that sort of HMO. But yeah, otherwise, like you say, there is still also build to rent, where you can rent apartments and share that and have that be with your friends that way, and you still have it's the same sort of management and the same sort of benefits that you get with co-living. But one of the benefits with co-living, which you touched on, which was all the bills included, that in terms of, it's not necessarily affordability, but it's certainly cost assurance. You know what your bills are every month. You're not going to get a really big electricity bill in winter or something like that. So that helps with people being able to plan their finances, knowing exactly how much money's coming out every month.
And we know that London is struggling to build more traditional forms of housing for a myriad of different reasons, not least with the kind of cost of borrowing and the construction costs. But I wonder, question for you both, how do you feel co-living in short to medium term will really add, or how important will it be to the mix of London's housing supply, not least to bring the cost of homes down, but also relieving pressure on more traditional forms of housing, where we just touched on HMOs becoming a bit of a sticking point in some communities?
Yeah, I think it's got a crucial role. I think there has to be choice, and I think, as we've touched on, whether that be affordability, whether it be flexibility, whether it be assurance on costs, whether it be your lifestyle choice, I think there needs to be a space where, and co-living counts towards housing delivery from a planning perspective. London is facing a significant challenge in terms of housing targets and the homes needed. And I think, home ownership, the aspirations of home ownership are changing. And I think we've got to accept that, and I think we need to have the choice for people to go, well, actually that suits me, and co-living isn't the answer for everyone. And I think I've been in quite a few discussions with local authority planners where we've said, well, we know that this isn't going to meet all of your housing needs, but it meets a broad brush of people who want flexibility, and therefore it's got to play a part.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I made a note earlier about how it's for anyone at different stages of their lives, where renting the studio space as part of the wider community is what they're looking for. So yeah, it's not for everyone, but it is for some people at certain stages of their life. It's exactly what they want, really.
In terms of local partnerships with the community, what benefits does co-living bring in that sense?
Well, I mean, we certainly partner up with sort of local restaurants where we bring in the chef for an evening.
Really?
Yes. So we might do sort
of
again.
Are there guest sessions?
Sign me up.
Well, this is why the good sort of MasterChef style kitchens, everyone calls it. The larger commercial size kitchens. Rather than the sort of smaller dotted around kitchens that are shared, they work really well, because then you can bring in people from the wider sort of restaurant F&B community to come in and do sort of evening sessions with our residents. So that's one way that we can link up with a wider community, and another way we always try and maybe sort of try and get some sort of discounts for residents at certain things, certain cafes or certain shops, and then again that sort of encourages the residents to use those facilities that are local. I don't know if there's, from a planning perspective, there's other ways of doing it.
Yeah, I think there's it's a really rewarding, and I think it's a great part of the co-living offering through planning is these buildings are managed, so they can integrate with the community. If you take a sort of typical flatter development, which has got its lobby, you're sort of limited because everyone owns their own flat, and it's just a different way of doing it. And I think with co-living you can partner with local community groups to offer them space, as I mentioned earlier, whether it be a church on a Sunday or local artists come and show their work. And I know there's been schemes that have had done sort of speed networking because there's lots of entrepreneurs living in the building, so you're trying to sort of empower, whilst you're connecting everybody within a community, you're also, creating opportunities for them as well. And I think in planning, I think that we should be trying to look for those opportunities to integrate within the community, but also create partnerships that, are flexible and allow people to say, well, actually, if I live in that building, not only am I getting this, but I'm also getting access to that. So, it's really got the potential, I think, is unlimited in terms of how co-living can integrate with the community, but also offer benefit to the residents and the local community.
Yeah, and it just shows how professionalised the management of co-living is now. It's not just sort of a concierge service that you might get in a built-to-rent. It's a whole plethora of activities and well-being for residents and the wider community as well.
I know that some operators, not least because I've this year stayed in a co-living space, but in a kind of weekend getaway, which it was quite an experience, I have to say, from a management perspective and actually a planning perspective. How difficult is that, or am I being too negative there? Is that part of the co-living offer that you can have temporary guests as well as longer term stays?
I mean, we do, and I think it also benefits residents if they have somebody visiting, family or friends, to be able to say, well, actually, we've got these, you can book and stay in the same place as me for a couple of nights. I think is a really good thing for the residents as well. It is something we do generally see that, yes. It's not a huge amount, though. I think it's only sort of a few units. So it doesn't normally affect the community, because I think that would be the one thing that you wouldn't want, is that there were so many that it ends up does feeling like a hotel, because it is about people meeting each other. But I think having a few which can again be used by the residents' friends is really useful. But I don't know how it affects it from a planning perspective.
Is this the future?
Well, I think there's similar to you. I've stayed in a building in Europe on a short break where it, and sort of being a planner, I was nosy as to what I was staying in, and it was sort of a hybrid of co-living, student accommodation, and a hotel all in one building.
It was mind blowing.
And it was mind blowing that I was in this space, and I thought, well, there's probably people who are living here day to day. There's me who's on my little holiday, and then there's someone who's studying day to day. But I thought it was brilliant that you just had this complete mashup of different people from different walks of life all staying in a space that was meeting their needs, opposed to rigidly saying, well, you've got to design a building which is this use or that use. I say that all acknowledging that the UK planning system has got some boundaries that we have to stick to.
Rigidity that we still need to work on.
Yeah, but it does ultimately, I think having those kind of minimum 3-month tenancies, which is required for co-living, I think that does put some sort of boundaries on how transient the population is in the building. But I'm aware that there are some schemes in London which are sort of blurring the lines between that sort of co-living hotel, apart hotel, and I think I think once again it's part of what's on offer.
I just want to say, it wasn't the student hotel in Amsterdam, was it?
No comment.
Because I've stayed there. So.
It funny enough actually was.
I knew as soon as you described it.
That's on my list. I was looking for a November getaway, so you've...
We're not sponsored by them by any means.
God, small world.
Yeah.
Yeah, good guess.
Yeah.
That is a pretty good guess. Not planned either, I have to say. But to wrap up, this has been actually really... fascinating discussion, and I'm really glad that Rochelle and our team thought to make this happen, because it's especially for us the element around loneliness is really important, even though this is part of the solution. It isn't necessarily the solution in the same way. Building co-living properties and tackling the housing crisis can all play its part to do that. To wrap up, and actually Mark, you prompted this, where would you both like to see policy, or perhaps the market, in the next 5 to 10 years? What are your aspirations for the co-living space? I'll start with you, Rosie.
So I don't like anything too prescriptive. I do think at the moment, the GLA guidance, once you go over a certain scale, you just end up with loads and loads of amenity, and you end up repeating what that amenity is. I'm also working on a lot of developments who don't want to make their amenity larger than 100 square meters, because then, as in per space, because then they have to bring in commercial sprinklers. So if I'm working on a large development and I need to provide 600 square meters, I'm providing 6 times 100 square meter amenity spaces, which I don't, so I think there just needs to be a bit of flexibility on the sort of larger scale in terms of you need to provide X amount of amenity. And I think that conversation that we had about the amenity being used for different things during different times of the day, I think there needs to, for me, I would rather have a conversation on what that amenity is and how it works, rather than just saying we're providing this amount of amenity and it ticks the GLA guidance box. So for me, it would be something slightly less prescriptive and a little bit more of a conversation.
I would say there's probably two things that I would hope for. The first is what I mentioned earlier, which is, I think, discounted market rents and how co-living can contribute towards affordability and affordable housing in London. Sort of linked to Rosie's point, I think the GLA's guidance is very much being looked at from various parts of the UK. And I think there's some local authorities who are doing something really interesting with discounted market rents and affordability outside of London. And I think we should be learning lessons from all over and not just focusing on one bit of policy and guidance. And the second one is, I think it's an aspiration that is maybe less policy, but an aspiration that I think the doubt and misconceptions around the quality of these spaces
Absolutely.
Shifts, and we shift to accept, almost an acceptance and a support that these are really great homes for people in London, and that it's part of the housing ecosystem in London, opposed to there still being, despite co-living now having been around for probably over a decade, the misconception going that actually these are great buildings, these are great developments, these are great homes. And I think just people accepting that it is needed, that would be a great shift, because you're still having those conversations where people are doubting whether it's going to work, doubting whether people want it, despite actually we now have a reasonable set of data and we're getting results where this is what a lot of people want and need.
Thank you for that, Mark, and that's certainly a great reflection for us. But that's all for this episode of the Better Places podcast. A big thank you to our guests, Mark Thomson and Rosie Ashton.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And to my co-host, Rochelle Blakeman.
Thank you.
And if you've enjoyed the discussion, make sure that you follow Better Places wherever you get your podcasts, and join us on the conversation on LinkedIn. I'm Siddo Dwyer. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time as we explore how London can build a better, fairer and more connected place.